Why was she still breathing when everyone else had decided she shouldn't be? The question hung in the frozen air like her last exhale. Alina Vance lay curled around her rifle on a mountain ridge that didn't care whether she lived or died. The sun had abandoned the valley hours ago, taking with it any illusion of mercy. Temperature didn't just drop here. It plummeted. It attacked. It stripped the warmth from her core with the efficiency of a predator that had done this 1,000 times before. She'd stopped shivering. That's what scared her most. Not the cold itself, but the absence of her body's fight against it. The violent tremors that had racked her frame for the first 2 hours had given way to a rigid stillness. Her muscles had turned to wood. Her joints felt like they'd been filled with cement. This wasn't adaptation. This was surrender. This was her body making peace with the mountain. She slapped her own face. The sound cracked through the silence like a rifle shot. "Wake up," she hissed. Her voice came out broken, a stranger's whisper. Not yet. Below her, the valley was a pool of ink. Somewhere in that darkness, her team was fighting for their lives. The men who had let her fall. The men who had watched the rope snap and made a choice in that split second. Continue the mission or go back for her. They'd chosen the mission. She couldn't even blame them for it. That's what they'd been trained to do. That's what she would have done. But it still hurt. It hurt more than the cold, more than the shattered knee that screamed with every micro-movement, more than the knowledge that hypothermia was slowly shutting down her organs like someone turning off lights in an empty house. Alina reached forward with fingers that no longer felt attached to her hand. She clicked the dial on her PVS-30, the night vision clip-on mounted in front of her scope. The world flared into grainy green existence. Shapes emerged from the void. Rock formations. The skeletal remains of the crashed Chinook helicopter. Heat signatures moving with purpose. The battery indicator blinked in the corner of her vision. Low power. She had one spare battery in her pocket, kept warm against her skin. One. After that, she'd be shooting blind. Thermal crossover had finally passed. For hours, the sun-baked rocks had retained their heat, glowing like ghosts in the infrared spectrum, making living bodies invisible. But the mountain had cooled now. The rocks had given up their stolen warmth, and the living stood out again against the dead stone. And there were so many living. Alina scanned the dry creek bed that snaked toward the crashed helicopter. It was a blind spot. The seals were watching the ridges, watching the obvious approaches. They were good. They were disciplined, but they couldn't see the ditch. 4 heat signatures, low, crawling on hands and knees. Professional slowness. They were dragging canvas bags, not weapons. Bags. Sappers. They weren't coming to shoot. They were coming to toss satchel charges into the open fuselage where her team huddled, where Miller and Bull and the others were burning through their ammunition, defending against attacks they could see. They'd never see this one coming. Range, 600 meters, steep angle, wind swirling through the canyon in patterns that defied prediction. Alina tried to settle the crosshair on the lead sapper's head. The reticle danced wildly. Her body was vibrating again, but not from cold, from the effort of holding still while every muscle fiber screamed. The crosshair jumped from the target's head to a rock 3 feet to his left. "Control," she begged her hands, "just for a second." She tried to use the respiratory pause, that natural moment of stillness at the bottom of an exhale. But her breathing was jagged, hitching in her chest like a car engine on its last breath. She had to time the shiver, wait for the tremor to pass, find that microscopic window of stillness. Shake, 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 pause, squeeze. The rifle suppressed the flash, but the sound was a sharp crack in the night air. Through the scope, she watched the lead sapper stop mid-crawl. His head snapped back like someone had yanked an invisible wire. He slumped face first into the dirt, and for a moment Alina felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, just cold arithmetic. 1 down, 3 to go. The other sappers froze. They were disciplined. They didn't panic and stand up. They flattened themselves against the earth, becoming indistinguishable from the rocks around them. Alina cycled the bolt, the movement agonizingly slow. The grease in the action had thickened in the cold, fighting her. "Don't move," she whispered to the shapes below. "Please don't move." If they rushed the last 100 meters, she couldn't stop them all. Not shaking like this. Not with hands that felt like they belonged to someone else. One of the sappers lifted his head just an inch, trying to spot the muzzle flash, trying to understand where death had come from. Shake, shake, pause, crack. The second round took him in the neck. He convulsed once, then went still. Now the remaining two panicked. Discipline broke. They scrambled up, abandoning stealth for speed, sprinting toward the helicopter wreckage, toward Miller, toward the men who had left her behind. "No," Alina gritted her teeth, forcing her shoulder into the stock. The pain helped. It gave her something to focus on besides the cold. She led the third target, watching him zigzag through the rocks. She fired. Missed the bullet, sparked off a rock inches from his feet. He was 40 meters from the perimeter now, close enough to throw. She racked the bolt, tearing the skin on her thumb. She didn't feel it. The blood was just another fluid turning to ice. She fired again. This time the round caught him in the back. He folded, sliding in the gravel with the momentum of his final sprint. The fourth man was close, too close. He pulled the pin on a grenade, his arm cocked back, ready to throw it into the heart of her team. Alina didn't breathe, she didn't think. She just let the weapon become an extension of her will. The rifle bucked. The bullet hit him in the side of the head. He dropped instantly, the grenade rolling from his dead hand. 1 second, 2 seconds, boom. The grenade detonated next to his body, the flash illuminating the creek bed for a split second, revealing the 4 crumpled forms to the SEALs just 30 meters away. Alina heard the radio chatter even at this distance. "Contact rear. Grenade. Check fire. Check fire." "I don't see them," Bull's voice confused. "Where did they come from?" "They're down," another voice shouted. 4 tangos in the ditch. They're all down." Silence returned to the valley, heavier than before, more oppressive. "Who killed them?" Miller's voice was low, carried by wind and radio static. "We didn't fire." "Sniper," Bull said. "Headshot all of them. Someone's watching the ditch." "It's not the QRF," Miller replied, and Alina could hear the confusion in his voice. "QRF is 2 hours out and they wouldn't use a bolt gun." "Then who?" "I don't know," Miller whispered, "but they just saved our lives." Up on the ridge, Alina rolled onto her back, gasping for air. The exertion had warmed her slightly, but now the sweat was cooling, turning into ice against her skin. She swapped the battery in her PVS-30, her fingers stiff and clumsy. The green glow flickered, then stabilized. She was dying, she knew it. The cold was winning, but she had 4 kills now, and Miller was still breathing. "You're welcome," she whispered to the stars. She pulled her knees to her chest, trying to trap the last of her body heat. She had to make it to dawn. Just one more sunrise, then maybe she could let go, then maybe she could stop fighting. But not yet. Not while they were still down there. Not while they still needed someone they didn't even know was watching. Something was wrong with the math. Alina had counted bodies for hours now, and the numbers didn't add up. The enemy was adapting. They'd stopped rushing the center where they'd lost so many men. Now they were pushing the flanks, moving through deep fissures where her rifle couldn't reach them. They were learning. They were smart. And that made them more dangerous than any amount of fanaticism. To her left, a squad of 6 fighters crawled along a depression in the terrain, dragging something heavy. A crate. Alina adjusted her scope, trying to get a better angle. Through the green haze of her night vision, she could make out the distinctive profile of a DSHK heavy machine gun. 50 caliber. Devastating. If they set that weapon up on the spur overlooking the crash site, they would turn the helicopter fuselage into Swiss cheese in seconds. The thin aluminum skin wouldn't stop those rounds. Neither would the bodies inside. The SEALs were blind to it. They were focusing their fire on the north, suppressing the decoys the enemy had cleverly pushed forward. Classic tactic. Draw the eyes one direction while the real threat came from another. Alina adjusted her scope, but the angle was wrong. A protruding rock blocked her shot on the gunner. She could see their feet shuffling. She could see the barrel being dragged, but she couldn't get a kill shot on the crew. She had to tell them. The radio was a cold brick of plastic in her pocket. For 14 hours she had been a silent guardian, a myth in the mountains, a ghost they could sense but not see. If she keyed that mic, everything changed. She ceased to be invisible. She became a problem. She became a complication. She became a witness to their decision to leave her behind. "Do it," she whispered. Her voice was a cracked ruin. She rotated the frequency dial to the team net. The chatter was frantic, desperate. "Running low on saw drums," Bull was shouting. "They're probing the north wall." "Hold fire," Miller replied, his voice tight with the strain of command. "Conserve ammo. Wait for targets." "They're flanking us, Rick. I can feel it." "Stay off the net unless you have eyes on." Alina pressed the push-to-talk button. The static hissed, a sound like sand pouring on glass. When she spoke, her voice was stripped of everything. No pain, no anger, no emotion. Just pure information delivered in the tone of someone who had moved beyond caring what anyone thought. "Bravo actual, break, shift fire left, direction 240, distance 100 meters, depression angle 10. You have a heavy weapon team setting up in the rocks." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the gunfire in the valley seemed to pause, as if the war itself had stopped to listen. Alina could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Slow, too slow. Her body was conserving energy, shutting down non-essential functions. "Who is this?" Miller's voice came back, breathless. It wasn't angry, it was terrified. It was the voice of a man hearing a ghost speak. "Bravo actual, this is Viper 1-1. Do not copy, just execute. You have 30 seconds before that DSHK opens up." "Vance," the name choked him. That's impossible. We saw you fall, you dropped." "You dropped me," Alina corrected, her voice ice cold. "Now drop them, traverse the saw left, aim for the V-shaped notch in the rocks, spray the area. Now Miller." Down in the valley there was a moment of hesitation. The psychological shock of hearing a dead woman give orders was freezing them faster than the snow. Alina could picture Miller's face. The confusion, the guilt, the disbelief. "God damn it, Miller," Alina screamed into the mic, her professional detachment finally cracking. "They are loading the belt. Fire the weapon." "Bull," Miller shouted, his voice cracking. "Left 240, the V-notch, light it up." "But sir, there's—" "Do it." The saw opened up, a sustained burst of automatic fire that echoed through the canyon. Tracer rounds arced through the darkness, searching. One of the enemy fighters popped up, panicking, trying to return fire. Alina didn't wait. Crack. Her suppressed rifle sent the round downrange. The fighter dropped. Through her scope, she watched the DSHK crew scatter, abandoning their weapon. "Threat neutralized," she said into the radio, her voice flat again. "Continue scanning. They're going to try the right flank next." "Vance," Miller's voice was thick with something Alina couldn't name. "Where are you? How are you?" "It doesn't matter where I am," she cut him off. "What matters is I can see what you can't. Now shut up and let me work." She released the button, cutting off whatever he'd been about to say. She didn't need his explanations. She didn't need his apologies. She needed him to stay alive. That was the only thing that mattered now. The only thing that could give meaning to the cold that was slowly claiming her from the inside out. Alina shifted position, dragging her body a few feet to the right. Every movement sent fire through her shattered knee, but she welcomed the pain now. It kept her sharp. It reminded her she was still alive. The enemy was massing for another push. She could see the heat signatures gathering behind a ridgeline, could sense the nervous energy even at this distance. They knew someone was up there. They knew a sniper was picking them off one by one, but they couldn't find her. The canyon acoustics were scrambling the sound of her shots, bouncing them off walls, making it seem like the bullets were coming from everywhere and nowhere. She was a ghost with a rifle, an angel of death they couldn't see or understand. And she was running out of time. The sun would rise in 6 hours. If she made it that long, the rescue would come. The QRF would arrive. Her team would be extracted, and she would finally be able to stop. Finally be able to close her eyes and let the mountain have what it had been trying to take all night. But until then, she had work to do. "Come on," she whispered to the shapes below. "Show me where you are." And they did. They always did. Because men who thought they were hidden always made the same mistakes. They moved a little too fast, exposed a silhouette a little too long, trusted the darkness to protect them. Alina didn't trust anything anymore, except the rifle, except the math, except the cold certainty that she would hold this line until there was nothing left of her to hold it with. Crack, another round downrange, another target down. She cycled the bolt, the mechanism smooth now that her body heat had warmed the action. She was burning through her core temperature to keep the weapon functional, trading her life for theirs 1 degree at a time. And somehow, impossibly, she didn't regret it. What does it feel like to be a bullet? The thought came to Alina unbidden as she lined up her next shot. To be singular in purpose. To exist for one moment, one trajectory, one target. To know with absolute certainty exactly what you were meant to do, and to do it without hesitation, without doubt, without the crushing weight of consequence. She envied the bullet. Her finger rested on the trigger, barely touching. Through the scope, she could see a mortar team setting up on the opposite ridge. They were good, professional. They dug a shallow pit to hide the muzzle flash, and they were working with the efficiency of men who'd done this 100 times. One man held the tube. Another prepared the rounds. A third was on security, scanning the ridges with binoculars. Range 1,100 meters, steep decline. The wind was doing something strange, swirling in eddies that made no sense. Alina watched a piece of torn fabric flutter near the target, trying to read the invisible currents of air. 2 minutes left. No, 3. The bullet would be in flight for over a second, a lifetime in ballistics. The Earth would rotate beneath it. Gravity would pull it down in a perfect parabola. The wind would push it sideways. She had to calculate it all, factor it all in, make all the corrections in her head because her ballistic computer had died hours ago when the cold killed its battery. She was the computer now. Her brain, running on fumes and spite, doing calculations that should have been impossible. The man holding the mortar round lifted it, preparing to drop it down the tube. If that round launched, it would land in the center of Miller's perimeter. It would kill indiscriminately. Bull, Ricky, the young medic whose name she couldn't remember but whose laugh she'd heard 1,000 times. Gone, all of them, because she didn't make this shot. Alina took a breath, held it, let half of it out, found that perfect moment of stillness between heartbeats where her body became a platform, a machine, a system designed for nothing but putting a small piece of metal exactly where it needed to be. She squeezed. The rifle bucked. The suppressor couldn't hide the crack completely, but it muffled it enough that the sound would be nearly impossible to locate in the echoing canyon. Through the scope, she watched the bullet's vapor trail, a microscopic distortion in the air. Time stretched. The bullet fought wind, gravity, physics itself. The man holding the mortar round simply ceased to exist as a threat. The 300 Win Mag slug caught him center mass. He crumpled backward, the mortar shell slipping from his hands and clattering harmlessly against the rocks instead of sliding down the tube. The other 2 men froze, staring at their fallen comrade. They hadn't heard the shot yet. At this distance, the bullet arrived before the sound. Alina racked the bolt, the mechanical action smooth and fast. The brass casing pinged off the rock next to her ear. She adjusted her aim. The second man, the gunner, was looking around wildly, trying to understand why his loader had just collapsed. She fired. The round struck him in the thigh, severing the femoral artery. He went down, thrashing, knocking the mortar tube over. Now the sound arrived. The crack thump echoed off the canyon walls, bouncing back and forth, making it impossible to triangulate. Down in the wreckage, Miller popped his head up, scanning the ridges. He was looking everywhere except where she was. He looked confused, awed even. He could see the enemy mortar team on the opposite ridge scrambling in panic, dragging their wounded into cover. "That's right, Commander," Elena whispered, chambering a third round. "Look at them, don't look at me." She scanned for the third man, but he'd scrambled deep into a fissure. The mortar threat was neutralized. The tube was tipped over, the crew dead or dying. She'd bought them another hour, maybe two. Elena didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel pride. She felt a cold, hard utility. She was a tool, a hammer falling from the sky. She noted the wind change in her mental logbook. The valley was waking up. The first shots had triggered something primal in the enemy. They knew now that staying still meant death, but moving meant death too. She'd put them in an impossible position. 31 rounds left, she said to the wind. She shifted her position, dragging her broken body a few feet to the right to change her angle, just in case someone had spotted the muzzle flash. The pain in her leg roared back to life, but she welcomed it. It kept her sharp. It kept her present. The game had just begun. After the mortar team went down, silence didn't return to the valley. Instead, it was replaced by a chaotic buzzing, like a hive that had been kicked over. Through her scope, Elena watched as the enemy fighters on the opposing ridge scrambled, shouting, pointing in wrong directions. The physics of the canyon were her only ally now. At this distance, the supersonic crack of the bullet passed the target before the muzzle report arrived. When the sound finally did reach them, it bounced off the granite walls, echoing 3-4 times. To the fighters below, her shot could have come from the north, the west, or the sky itself. She was everywhere and nowhere, a ghost with a rifle, the thing they feared most. Elena rolled onto her side, grabbing the drag handle of her rifle. Shoot and scoot protocol usually meant sprinting to a secondary position. For her, it was a gruesome, agonizing slither. She dragged herself 10 meters through a narrow fissure in the rocks, trailing blood from her knee where the sharp granite had torn through her pants. She didn't have the strength to care. Blood was just another resource being depleted. She settled into a new hide, a gap between two boulders that offered a narrow keyhole view of the valley floor. The initial shock was wearing off. The enemy realized they weren't being bombed by aircraft or artillery. They were being sniped. One person, one rifle, and they still had the numbers. "Allahu Akbar," a voice boomed over the valley, amplified by the acoustics. Elena scanned the terrain. About 600 meters from the SEAL perimeter, a large group of fighters was massing behind a dried riverbed. They were preparing for a wave attack, a tactic designed to overwhelm the team's limited ammunition with sheer bodies. In the center of the group, a man in a black vest stood tall, waving an AK-47. He was shouting, rallying the men who were hesitating. "Leadership, cut the head off the snake." Elena adjusted her parallax. Range, 950 meters, steep decline. The wind had picked up again, swirling unpredictably through the cuts in the rock. She watched the vegetation, scrub brush bending east near the target, but dust blowing west near her position. A crosswind shifting to a headwind mid-flight. She dialed in corrections. It was a guess. An educated guess based on 15 years of trigger time, but still a guess. The margin of error at this range was measured in inches. One wrong calculation and she'd miss. And if she missed, 50 men would charge the helicopter, and Miller's team would be overrun in minutes. "Breathe," she whispered. She focused on the man in the black vest. He was the catalyst. If he lived, they charged. If he died, they scattered. The man turned, exposing his profile. Elena squeezed. The rifle bucked. She held the follow-through, watching the vapor trail of the bullet distort the air. The round hit low. It struck the man's hip, spinning him around violently. He didn't die instantly. He fell, screaming, clutching his shattered pelvis. "Good enough," Elena muttered. The effect was immediate. The fighters around him didn't surge forward. They dove for cover. The invincibility of their leader had been shattered. The wave attack dissolved into a scramble for individual survival. Elena cycled the bolt. A fighter tried to drag the commander to safety, exposing himself. Elena put the crosshair on his chest. Crack. He dropped. Down in the wreckage, the radio traffic was frantic. Actual, do you have eyes on the shooter? Negative, Miller's voice was tight, laced with something Elena couldn't quite name. Confusion, awe, fear. That shot sounded like it came from the north. Is it the QRF? Do we have friendlies in the AO? I don't know, but look at them run. Someone is hammering them. Elena listened to their confusion with cold detachment. They were looking for a savior. They were looking for a helicopter gunship or a platoon of rangers materializing out of the mountains. They couldn't conceive that the hammer was the broken woman they had dropped from the sky, the one they'd written off as dead the moment the rope snapped. She shifted her aim. A machine gunner on a technical truck, a Toyota Hilux mounted with a DSHK, was trying to bring his heavy weapon to bear on the SEALs. Range 900 meters. Elena fired. The bullet impacted the engine block of the truck, cracking the block but not stopping the gunner. She cursed, racking the bolt faster. Adjust. Aim high. The second shot took the gunner in the shoulder. He slumped over his weapon, firing a burst into the sky before going still. The valley fell silent again. The enemy was paralyzed. Every time someone stood up, they died. Every time someone took charge, they fell. They were fighting a phantom that struck from everywhere and nowhere. They were losing to fear as much as bullets. Elena pulled back from her scope, her vision blurring. The exertion was catching up. Her hands were trembling so badly she had to press them against the cold rock to steady them. She took a sip of water, rationing it. The liquid was slushy with ice crystals. It hurt going down. She'd bought them an hour, maybe two, but the sun was dipping lower now, shadows stretching across the valley floor. Night was coming, true darkness, and darkness would nullify her range advantage. It would hide the enemy as they crawled closer. She had no night vision capability for her rifle scope, only her PVS-31 goggles, which were useless for long-range precision. When the sun went down, the game would change. She wouldn't be the hunter anymore. She'd be the hunted. Miller, she said into the silence, knowing he couldn't hear her. Get your boys ready. It's going to get cold. She checked her magazine. 3 rounds left. She reached into her pouch and began the slow, deliberate process of reloading, pressing each brass cartridge into the steel box with a thumb that no longer felt like it belonged to her. She was alone. She was broken. But she owned this mountain, and she wasn't done with it yet. How many kills does it take to stop being human? Elena didn't know the exact number, but she knew she'd passed it hours ago. She'd lost count somewhere around 15. After that, they stopped being people and became problems to solve, equations to calculate, targets to service. Target. What a clinical word for ending a life. Servicing a target. Like she was a technician fixing a malfunctioning machine, not a woman sending bullets through flesh and bone. The sun was an hour from setting now, painting the valley in shades of blood and gold. Beautiful. The mountain was always beautiful when it was killing you. Elena lay prone behind her rifle, her body a study in contradictions. Burning with fever from the infection spreading from her knee, yet shaking with cold. Exhausted beyond measure, yet hyperalert, her senses sharpened by adrenaline and the proximity of death. She'd moved positions again, dragging herself to a rocky outcrop that gave her a better view of the eastern approach. The movement had taken 20 minutes and left a smear of blood on the granite. She didn't have the luxury of caring about that anymore. Stealth was secondary to angles. If they found her, they found her. At least she'd take a few more with her before the end. Through her scope, she could see the SEALs in the helicopter wreckage. They were running low on everything. Ammunition, water, hope. Miller was on the radio, his voice tight with the kind of control that came from knowing that panic would kill his men faster than bullets. The QRF was delayed. Weather had grounded the helicopters. They'd have to drive in overland, which meant hours. Many hours. The enemy knew it too. They'd pulled back after Alina's devastating long-range shots, but they hadn't retreated. They were regrouping, repositioning, waiting for darkness to become their ally. Alina chambered around, the bolt sliding home with a mechanical certainty that was comforting in its simplicity. The rifle never lied. It never made excuses. It never left anyone behind. It simply did what it was designed to do, and it did it perfectly every time if you gave it what it needed. Proper ammunition, proper maintenance, a steady hand. She no longer had a steady hand, but she had stubbornness. And stubbornness, it turned out, could substitute for steadiness if you were willing to take enough time between shots. Movement caught her eye. A group of fighters was working their way through a boulder field, using the rocks for cover. Smart. They'd learned. They weren't exposing themselves anymore. They were moving like professionals now, respecting the ghost in the mountains. But they were still moving, and movement meant angles. It meant exposures. Brief, fleeting opportunities measured in fractions of seconds. Alina watched them through the scope, waiting. She'd learned patience from a scout sniper instructor in Camp Pendleton who told her that sniping wasn't about shooting. It was about waiting. You wait for the shot, he'd said. You don't force it. The shot reveals itself. Your job is to be ready when it does. She was ready. One of the fighters paused just for a moment to check his rifle. His head and shoulders rose above the boulder line. Range, 700 meters, moderate wind. Downhill angle compensated for. Alina didn't think. She just let the training take over, let her body execute the shot sequence it had performed 10,000 times in training and hundreds of times in combat. Crack! The fighter dropped. The others froze, then scattered like insects when you lift a rock. Alina worked the bolt, but they'd already disappeared into cover. One shot, one opportunity. That's all they were giving her now. They'd learned the cost of carelessness. Viper 1-1, Miller's voice crackled over the radio. What's your status? Alina picked up the radio, her hand trembling. Her status? She was dying. She was infected. She was hypothermic. She had maybe 10 rounds left and the sun was setting and she couldn't feel her feet anymore. But that's not what he was asking. He was asking if she could still do the job. Operational, she replied. Her voice was barely recognizable, a hoarse whisper that sounded like wind through rocks. I have eyes on your eastern approach. Multiple contacts maneuvering through the boulder field. They're getting smarter. Copy that, Miller said. There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, softer, human. Vance, we're coming for you. As soon as the QRF gets here, we're coming up there. Negative, Alina replied. You focus on staying alive. I've got a good position up here. It was a lie. Her position was terrible, exposed, no escape route, but it had the best angles, and angles were all that mattered now. Just keep your heads down, Commander. I'll tell you when to move. She released the button before he could argue, before he could make promises he couldn't keep, before the human part of this conversation made her remember that she was human too, and humans weren't supposed to be able to do what she'd been doing for the past 16 hours. The eastern group had gone to ground, but now movement was starting on the south side. They were coordinating now, multiple approaches, trying to split her attention. It was working. She couldn't cover all the angles. She was one rifle, one broken woman on a mountain that wanted her dead. Alina traversed her rifle to the south, scanning. There, 3 fighters moving through a depression using the terrain. They thought they were hidden. They thought the angle was too steep for her to see them. They were wrong. She adjusted for the extreme downhill angle. The bullet would impact high if she didn't compensate. She held low below the lead fighter's chest, aiming for his belt line. The rifle settled. Her breathing slowed. The shaking in her hands seemed to pause, just for a moment, as if her body understood that this moment required precision, and had called a temporary ceasefire with the cold that was trying to kill her. Crack! The round hit the fighter in the chest. Perfect correction. He stumbled backward and disappeared from view. The other 2 went prone, invisible. Alina didn't try to find them. They'd stay pinned there, too afraid to move, and that was good enough. She swept her scope back to the east. The group there was moving again, trying to use the moment when she was looking south. But she'd seen them, always watching, always calculating. She was becoming the mountain itself, seeing everything, knowing everything, patient and cold and merciless. A fighter rose up to throw a grenade toward the helicopter. Bad decision. Alina's crosshair found him mid-motion, arm cocked back. She fired. The bullet struck him in the shoulder, spinning him. The grenade fell from his hand, detonating among his own men. The screams echoed across the valley, and Alina felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not horror. Just the cold, mathematical assessment of a threat neutralized. The sun touched the western peaks. Minutes now until darkness, full darkness. Alina checked her magazine. 7 rounds. 7 more chances to keep them alive. 7 more solutions to 7 more problems. She reached for another magazine and found her pouch empty. 7 rounds. That was all she had left in the world. After that, she'd be reduced to her sidearm, useless at these ranges. After that, she'd be nothing but a woman on a mountain, waiting for the cold or the enemy to claim her. 7 rounds, she whispered to herself. Make them count. Down in the valley, Miller's voice came over the radio again. All stations, prepare for night defense. They're going to hit us hard after sundown. Conserve ammo. Make every shot matter. Alina listened to him, trying to inspire his men, trying to keep them focused. He was good at his job. A natural leader. The kind of man who could make other men believe they could survive the unsurvivable. She'd always respected that about him. Even now, even after he'd dropped her from the rope. Because that's what leaders did. They made impossible choices. They sacrificed the few for the many. They carried the weight of those decisions for the rest of their lives. She didn't envy him that burden. Didn't envy any of them. She just wanted them to live. Wanted them to make it home to families who loved them, to lives that had meaning beyond this frozen valley. And if the cost of that was her life, her warmth, her last 7 rounds, then that was a cost she'd pay. Because sometimes, the only way to prove you were never weak was to be strong when no one was watching, when there was no recognition, no medal, no parade. Just you and your rifle and the cold certainty that you were doing what needed to be done. The sun slipped behind the peaks. Darkness came fast in the mountains, swallowing the valley in minutes. Alina activated her PVS-30 one-night vision goggles, but they were meant for navigation, not precision shooting. The world turned green and grainy. Depth perception flattened. Distances became guesses. She couldn't make long shots anymore. Not in this. But she could still fight. She could still watch. She could still be the invisible guardian they didn't know they had. Come on then, she whispered to the darkness. Show me what you've got. And they came. Shadows in the night. Heat signatures moving with confidence now that they thought the sniper was blind. They didn't know she'd traded her humanity for this moment. They didn't know she'd become something else entirely. Something patient, something cold, something that wouldn't stop until the sun rose or her heart did. Alina settled behind her rifle and waited for the next shot to reveal itself. The darkness was absolute now, the kind of dark that existed nowhere else but in mountains far from civilization. Alina's night vision goggles turned the world into a grainy green simulation of reality, but it was better than nothing. Through them, she could see the enemy massing for their final push. They knew the SEALs were nearly out of ammunition. They knew rescue was still hours away. They knew this was their moment. They didn't know about her. Not really. They knew there was a sniper somewhere in the rocks, but they thought it was a scout team or a forward observer. They couldn't imagine that one broken woman had been decimating their force for almost 20 hours. The human mind refused to accept that kind of asymmetry. It wasn't possible. It wasn't reasonable. But Alina had stopped being reasonable around the same time. She stopped feeling her toes. She'd crawled to a new position, dragging herself through rock and ice to a tiny shelf that gave her a commanding view of the valley. The movement had taken an hour and had left her gasping, but now she could see everything. The crashed helicopter, the sealed defensive perimeter, the enemy staging areas, every avenue of approach. She was a queen on a chessboard, able to see the entire game from above. But she was also dying. The infection from her shattered knee had spread. She could feel it, a fever heat spreading through her core even as the cold tried to steal the same warmth. Her body was fighting two wars now, and it was losing both. Her hands shook constantly. Her vision would blur and then snap back into focus. She'd catch herself drifting, consciousness slipping away, and have to slap herself awake again. Not yet, she told herself, just a little longer. Through her goggles, she watched the enemy commander standing behind a rock, illuminated by a small fire. He was smart enough to stay hidden from the SEALs below, but he hadn't thought to worry about the ridge above. Alina could see him clearly, could see him gesturing to his men, organizing the final assault. He was the spider at the center of the web. Kill him and the web collapsed. Range 800 meters. Night vision. No scope. Just iron sights and the PVS-31 goggles that weren't meant for this kind of shot. It should have been impossible, but Alina had spent her entire life doing things people said were impossible. Being a woman in naval special warfare, making it through Bud S when everyone said she'd ring the bell, earning the respect of men who didn't think she belonged, surviving a fall that should have killed her, killing 33 enemy fighters while slowly freezing to death. What was one more impossible thing? She settled the rifle, using a rock as a rest. The commander was standing still, confident in his cover. He thought he was safe. Through the grainy green image, Alina could just make out his silhouette. She aimed for center mass. At this range, in these conditions, anything else would be foolish. She took a breath. The world narrowed to just the shot, not the cold, not the pain, not the knowledge that this was probably her last shot, that after this she'd have 6 rounds left and an enemy that would locate her position and swarm her location. None of that mattered, only the shot. Crack! The rifle bucked. Through the goggles, she saw the commander jerk backward, saw him fall. The men around him scattered, shouting. Panic rippled through their ranks like a stone thrown into still water. Their leader was down. The invisible demon in the mountains had struck again. Alina worked the bolt. 5 rounds left. She scanned for targets of opportunity. A man was trying to rally the others, standing tall, waving his arms. Crack! He fell. 4 rounds. Another fighter, braver or more foolish than the rest, grabbed the dead commander's radio. Crack! 3 rounds. The radio tumbled from dead hands. The assault broke before it began. The enemy scattered into the rocks, no longer coordinated, no longer confident. They'd lost too many leaders, too many men, too much blood to the invisible ghost. They were defeated not by superior numbers or firepower, but by fear. By the creeping certainty that they were fighting something they couldn't see, couldn't kill, couldn't escape. Alina lowered her rifle, her hands trembling violently now. She'd done it. She'd broken their will. The SEALs would survive until dawn, until the QRF arrived. Miller and Bull and the others would go home. They'd see their families again. They'd live. And she'd given them that gift from the darkness, asking nothing in return. Viper 1-1, Miller's voice came over the radio, urgent. They're falling back. I don't know what you did, but they're retreating. Multiple groups pulling back to the north. Alina picked up the radio with hands that barely responded to her commands. Good, she whispered. Keep your heads down. They might try again. Vance, what's your condition? Miller asked, and she could hear the concern in his voice. The guilt, the understanding finally of what she'd been doing up here. We have a medic. We can. I'm fine, Alina lied. She wasn't fine. She was so far from fine that the word had lost all meaning. But they didn't need to know that. They needed to focus on survival, not on a rescue mission that would get them killed. Just stay alive, Commander. That's an order. She meant it as a joke, but it came out flat, emotionless. She released the button before he could respond. before he could make promises about extraction and medical evacuation and bringing her home, because she knew the truth that he didn't yet understand. She wasn't going home. The mountain had claimed her hours ago. She'd just been too stubborn to accept it. But now, with the battle over, with the adrenaline fatting, she could feel it. The cold had penetrated too deep. The infection had spread too far. Her core temperature was too low. Even if rescue came right now, even if a helicopter landed next to her this instant, she wasn't sure her body would survive the flight. Alina set the radio down and looked at the sky. The stars were incredible up here. Infinite, beautiful, indifferent. They'd been watching when she fell. They'd been watching when she killed. They'd be watching when she finally stopped. She thought about her mother, who told her she was too small for the military. About her father, who'd never understood why she needed to prove herself. About the recruiter who tried to steer her toward administration. About the instructor who'd pulled her aside during Bud S and told her, kindly, that it was okay to quit. About Miller, standing on that rope ladder, making the choice to let her fall. They'd all been wrong about her. Or maybe they'd been right, and she'd just been too stubborn to accept it. It didn't matter now. Alina pulled her rifle close, hugging it like a child might hug a teddy bear. The metal was cold against her cheek, but it was familiar, comfortable. This weapon had never doubted her, had never questioned whether she belonged. It had just worked perfectly every time she asked it to. Thank you, she whispered to it, to the rifle, to the mountain, to whatever force had kept her alive long enough to finish this. Thank you for letting me be enough. Her eyes drifted closed. She forced them open. Not yet. She still had 3 rounds left. 3 more chances to protect them if the enemy regrouped. 3 more opportunities to prove that letting her fall had been the right choice, because she'd done more from this ridge than she ever could have done with them in that valley. Dawn came slowly to the mountains, like the world itself was reluctant to witness what the night had wrought. Alina didn't remember closing her eyes, but she must have, because now they were open again and the sky had shifted from black to deep blue to the pale gray of pre-dawn. She was still alive. Somehow. Her body had clung to consciousness through pure spite, refusing to let go until the job was done. The valley below was quiet. The enemy had scattered in the night, broken by fear and the relentless toll of the invisible sniper. The SEALs were still in the wreckage, waiting for extraction. Safe. Alive because of her. Alina tried to move and couldn't. Her body had frozen in place, not just from the cold but from the complete depletion of everything that made movement possible. Her muscles had nothing left to give. Her joints had locked. She was a statue now, carved from ice and determination, unable to do anything but watch the sun rise one more time. The radio crackled. Viper 1-1, this is QRF actual. We're 5 minutes out. Mark your position with smoke if able. She couldn't reach the radio, couldn't lift her hand, couldn't do anything but listen. Viper 1-1, do you copy? The voice was insistent, worried. Vance, if you can hear us, we're coming, hold on. Hold on, such simple words, such an impossible ask. Miller's voice came over the channel. QRF actual, last known position was somewhere on the northwest ridge above our location. She was providing overwatch all night. She saved us. She saved all of us. Alina smiled. It hurt, pulling at cracked lips, but she smiled anyway. He understood now. They all did. She hadn't failed when she fell. She'd succeeded in ways they couldn't have imagined. The sun broke over the eastern peaks, and the light was warm on her face. Not enough to thaw her, not enough to save her, but warm enough to feel like a benediction, like forgiveness, like the mountain finally acknowledging that she'd earned her place here. She heard the helicopters before she saw them, the deep thrum of rotor blades cutting through thin air, 2 Black Hawks coming in fast and low. One would extract Miller's team, the other would search for her. There, someone shouted over the radio. I've got a heat signature on the north face, single person, not moving. Is she alive? Miller's voice desperate now. I don't know, we're going in. The helicopter banked, coming toward her position. Alina wanted to wave, wanted to signal, wanted to show them she was still here. But her body had nothing left. She'd spent every last reserve of strength pulling that trigger 33 times. There was nothing remaining for something as trivial as movement. The Black Hawk hovered above her, the downdraft from its rotors sending snow and ice swirling. She saw the crew chief looking down at her through the open door, saw him speaking urgently into his headset. A rope deployed, and two pararescue men fast-roped down to her position. "Holy shit," one of them breathed as he knelt beside her. His hands were gentle as he checked for a pulse. "She's alive. Barely, but she's alive." "Temperature?" his partner asked, already pulling out a thermal blanket. 79 degrees. Severe hypothermia, possible sepsis from that leg wound. We need to move now. They worked with practiced efficiency, wrapping her in blankets, stabilizing her leg, preparing to lift her. Alina tried to speak, tried to tell them about the rifle, about the 3 rounds still in the magazine, about the fact that someone should take it because a weapon that good deserved to be used. But no words came. Just a wheeze of air that might have been her final breath or might have been the beginning of something else. Something like hope. "Stay with us, Vance," the pararescueman said, his face close to hers. "You did it. Your team is safe. The mission is complete. Now it's time to let us take care of you." Mission complete. The words echoed in her mind as they lifted her onto the stretcher, as they hooked her to the hoist line, as she rose into the air above the ridge that had been her home for 22 hours. She'd completed the mission. Not the one she'd been sent to do, but the one she'd chosen. The one that mattered. As the helicopter carried her away from the mountain, Alina looked down at the valley one last time. She could see the SEAL team being loaded onto the other Black Hawk. Could see Miller standing at the door, looking up toward her helicopter, his hand raised in a salute that she couldn't return but felt in her chest nonetheless. She'd been wrong about them leaving her behind. They hadn't abandoned her. They'd just given her the opportunity to become something more than she'd been before the fall, something legendary, something that would be told in whispers in training schools and bars and briefing rooms. The story of the sniper who fell from the sky and decided to stay there, who turned abandonment into purpose, who proved that strength wasn't about being unbreakable, but about refusing to break when every reason to do so existed. Alina closed her eyes as the helicopter banked toward the medical station. She didn't know if she'd wake up again, didn't know if her body could recover from what she'd put it through, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She'd held the line. And sometimes that's all that dignity asks of us. To hold the line when no one else can. To be the shield when no one even knows they need shielding. To sacrifice everything for people who might never know your name, and to do it not for glory, but because it's right. The mountain faded behind them, still and cold and indifferent. But Alina Vance had made it care. For 22 hours, she'd made that mountain acknowledge that she existed, that she mattered, that she was more than the woman they'd let fall. She was the woman who refused to stop falling until she'd hit every target that needed hitting, until every life that needed saving was saved. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And in acting, it becomes eternal.